The Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources of the University of California brings you these tomato research reports from California's Central Valley. First, we'll look at fresh market tomato variety trial results and learn about reflective mulch field studies. Later, we'll find out about research on processing tomato varieties and see a tomato plant that has been genetically modified to be salt tolerant. We begin in Merced County. Here, the California Tomato Commission and researchers from the University of California Cooperative Extension are hosting a fresh market tomato field day. Robert Singleton has the story.
We're in southern Merced County, here in the Great Central Valley, which is about midpoint, and we're talking this morning with Bill Weir, who's a farm advisor in Merced County and a vegetable crops advisor. We're here to talk about a field trial that he's conducting. And Bill, to kind of set the stage for today's events on this field day, can you give us an idea what the significance of this field trial is?
Yes, I think so. Behind us is a variety trial for tomatoes in the region. We call it a regional variety trial. There's a similar trial in Tulare County and also one in San Joaquin counties. So Tulare County has the early maturing variety trial. This is the mid-maturing variety trial. And finally, the later maturing is in San Joaquin County. So we have the same varieties in all three trials. We have this year 9 replicated varieties, and you can see 2 of them are with stakes behind us, 2 of the reps. And then there are about 20 what we call observational varieties, and these are varieties that we're just looking at for the first time. And if they do well, if they yield well and have good shaped fruit and so forth, then they'll move into the replicated variety trial for next year.
And what can the people who are attending today's field day expect to see or learn about?
Well, in the variety trial here, they'll get to see some of the new varieties coming along, and a lot of the seedsmen and growers are very interested in that. What kind of fruit? There's in fact 2 varieties in here that have exceptionally long shelf life, and so people are interested in that, as well as good quality and good shape and good color and so forth. And then after we leave this variety trial stop, we're going to a reflective mulch stop, if you will. And there some reflective material is placed in the rows to deter aphids from coming there and landing, and it has worked well in the past, and we trust it'll work well again this year. And then finally there's a conservation tillage site that we're going to stop at, and in this case the field was planted to cover crop during the winter. That cover crop was only laid down. It wasn't tilled in or anything, and then tomatoes planted right into that mulch for conservation of water, for weed control, for different things.
We're here in southern Merced County and talking now with Bob Mullen, who's a farm advisor up in San Joaquin County. Bob is here to share with us today some information that he's been working on concerning tomato disease identification. This is particularly troublesome topic, Bob, I imagine, because of all the diseases that tomatoes are subject to. What are you doing and what are you looking at as far as what's going on today?
Okay, my mainly directed research this year is on late blight, which has been a source of problems for both fresh market tomato growers as well as processing growers. I've been doing a lot of the efficacy work with newer chemicals. Some additional work is being done on the campus looking at screening in the greenhouse. But for the field day today, we brought down some fresh late blight affected material that came out of a processing tomato field in Yolo County up toward just north of Woodland. In addition, we're going to try to show Brenna Agater is a PhD candidate at Davis, working for Mike Davis, and Brenna's come down, and between the 2 of us we have about 7 or 8 diseases that we're going to show growers. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're affected by all of these different problems, but just so the growers, the PCAs, and seedsmen can recognize looking at some fresh materials. So we've got things like powdery mildew, black mold, there's some stuff on spotted wilt. I brought down Phytophthora root rot. We've also we've had a weird problem this year, sporadic, but with transplants, with what we're calling aerial Phytophthora, and it's caused by Phytophthora capsucea. And I brought down a specimen of that came from a field in my county, south end of the county, down toward Vernalis.
What disease has been particularly a problem for the fresh market tomato industry this year?
Well, I think the biggest problem has been this aerial phytophthora that I mentioned. It's because it's been sporadic in a number of areas throughout the state. I wouldn't call it a major problem. I think it's just the fact that it's been fairly unique and it's been sporadic in the fields. I think as we get later in the season, there's going to be some general concern. We've had powdery mildew, as we always do, but again, if the field's healthy, like the field we're standing in right now, generally speaking, you're not going to have much of a problem with a regular spray program of getting much loss due to powdery mildew, because the field is nice and healthy. But for my area, as we get into later summer, this area and further north, when we get into the cooler days, shorter days, and a lot of dew formation, once we get into September and October, those fields are going to be subject, I think, to some potential problems from late blight, and that's one of the main concerns we've got.
Talking now with entomologist Charlie Summers. Charlie's been doing extensive research in the area of using reflective mulches for repelling certain insects that are a real problem as far as vectoring, or shall we say spreading diseases among tomato crops. Charlie, can you bring us up to date on what you've done so far and what you've learned?
Yeah, Robert, we have, as you'd indicated, we've been looking at the use of these reflective mulches for a number of years now, primarily to do two things. One, as you indicate, is to repel vectors of plant diseases, primarily virus diseases, and then the other thing simply is to repel the insects themselves. The philosophy being that if the insect doesn't land, it, number one, doesn't transmit the virus disease that it's carrying to the plant, and secondly, it doesn't begin colonizing the plant and then build up and become a problem in and of its own right. So this is the approach that we've been looking at. We found that these reflective mulches reflect ultraviolet light back into the sky, and a number of insects, particularly the aphids and the whiteflies, are repelled by these ultraviolet wavelengths. So as these are reflected back into the sky, an aphid or a whitefly flying over the field perceives these wavelengths, is repelled by them, and then doesn't land. There can be other insects involved, and most notably is the sugar beet leafhopper, which transmits a disease called curly top and can be very, very devastating. We found that these reflective mulches also repel sugar beet leafhopper, and thus the incidence of curly top virus in plots that are covered with these reflective mulches is significantly lowered from plants planted over fallow soil.
Now, you've been looking at this type of research for how long, and what has been the sort of the bottom line answer that you've learned?
Well, my colleague Jim Staple and I have been looking at these kinds of studies for approximately 8 years now, and I guess in a nutshell what we have found is that by using these reflective mulches, you have the ability to grow crops where without the reflective mulches you simply can't grow them because of the high incidence, particularly of either the aphid-borne viruses or in our area the silverleaf whitefly. Primarily tomatoes and also cucurbits, squash, pumpkins, cucumbers, things like this, simply cannot be grown in the fall in this part of the valley because of the high incidence of either the diseases or the insects. These diseases cannot be controlled by insecticides because they are acquired and transmitted by the vector in only a matter of seconds. And so long before the vector would ever get a lethal dose of insecticide, it can infect many, many plants. So insecticides don't work. The reflective mulches do work, and we can offer the growers the ability to produce a crop where before they were unable to do so.
And in the production of such a crop, what are we looking at in terms of cost factors? How much it'll cost the grower per acre to utilize this reflective mulch material, and its value in terms of its long-term usage approach?
The cost of the mulch varies a little bit depending on who the supplier is, the size of the beds that the grower is using, but generally we figure somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 to $250 per acre, again, like I say, depending on the crop. In one of the tomato studies we're doing right now, we are keeping accurate records of all of the inputs into 3 production systems One using the reflective mulch, a second using cover crops and a reduced tillage approach, and the third, the conventional method of producing fresh market tomatoes. As I say, we're keeping accurate records of all inputs, and at the conclusion of the study we will be able to provide a detailed economic analysis of exactly what it's costing and what the return is on these three systems.
So in your view as a scientist, is this a sort of a technique that has long-term applicability as far as its use over, say, several years?
Oh, most definitely. This is a technique, and it's being adopted by more and more growers in our area every year that offers a method of producing crops, as I say, that couldn't be produced otherwise. Tremendous reduction in the amount of insecticides it takes to produce these crops. For example, with silverleaf whitefly, while it's not vectoring any diseases, it's a very, very destructive insect. And growers may have to treat as many as a half a dozen to a dozen times during the year. Using these reflective mulches, we can cut those treatments by half easily. And so that's a benefit to the grower. It's also a benefit to the environment not to have these many pesticides put into the system.
And last question, Charlie. Of course, some of the visitors today spoke about the recycling of this material. Once it gets used, what do they do with it? Right
now, this is one of the downsides. It's like any other approach in farming, I suppose. There are the good and the bad and the ugly, and in everything, this is kind of the bad and the ugly, I suppose, in that at the present time, these plastics have to be disposed of in landfills. There are groups out there that are working on recycling these plastics. There's also recently a tremendous interest been developed in looking at biodegradable plastics. So this is something that's looming on the horizon, would either be recycling of the existing polyethylene films that we're using, or the utilization of biodegradable materials that after a certain length of time will simply break down and be absorbed into the soil without any adverse impacts.
Charlie and I have been working on this plastic mulch for about 10 years now, and the way we started with this work was actually in the beginning I was evaluating a sprayable type of a kind of a paint mulch surface that reflected the light. And we found that we got very beneficial effects on repelling insects, especially those insects which transmit plant viruses. And we found that by using these reflective surfaces on the plastic mulches, we could protect the plants from infestations by insects and also preventing virus disease epidemics that would be transmitted by those insects. What we do is we first start out by applying the drip irrigation system on the preformed beds that we've made, and then we put down the plastic, and we'll put holes in the plastic at pre-measured distances in order to get the correct plant spacing, and then we transplant in the tomatoes. So it's, in this particular case, it's not direct seeded, although you certainly could direct seed with this system as well. Most fresh market tomatoes in this area are not direct seeded. Virtually all are transplants. The one problem that we've had with insects that we're not able to control with the plastic mulch, especially this year, have been the worms. And what we would do in the case of worm problems is to apply Bacillus thuringiensis or BT sprays to control those. So even though the plastic mulch goes a long way in reducing insect damage, it can't completely control them, and so in some cases we do need to apply some sprays. Primarily the growers that are using this type of culture are the small growers and the organic growers. Obviously, if you can have a treatment like this that does not require pesticides to be applied on the plants, that's a real advantage if you're trying to sell to the organic markets. and also the intensive nature of the small farms makes the profit margin a little better for using plastic to get tip-top yields.
We dropped in on a tomato variety trial field meeting in Yolo County in California's Sacramento Valley. In addition to processing tomato variety trial, UC researchers also discussed the result of a late blight fungicide control field trial and presented updates on stink bug and black mold monitoring. Robert Singleton has the story.
We're here in Yolo County talking now with Farm Advisor Gene Meow. Behind us here is a variety trial that you just finished explaining to the visiting growers here about some of the research that you've been conducting in this trial. Can you give us a brief profile of what it's all about?
Well, we're looking at varieties to see how they might adapt for local growers and also to try to improve fruit quality to the processors and ultimately for the consumers. And so we're looking at things that might improve fruit sugars, so that would affect taste. We're looking at varieties that are more robust and can withstand some of the disease as well as some of the harsh weather conditions that they might face. Because we know that this year there were temperatures here that were in excess of 100 degrees, and we would expect that in many of our years. So we want to evaluate these varieties for their fitness for our local industry.
And of this trial, what have you learned so far?
Well, we're seeing that some of the varieties are higher in soluble solids, which means there'll be more pizza paste for the consumer from the same pound of tomatoes. So that's a benefit. Our fruit are becoming higher quality in terms of shipping and handling. We're trying to increase productivity so that the product is more profitable for our growers, and ultimately consumers will benefit from that also.
This year you're talking about two disease problems which you mentioned could possibly jeopardize crop production and crop harvest. Let's talk first about black mold and then a little bit about late blight. Why is the black mold a serious problem this year?
Well, black mold is ripe fruit rot, and it's weather-related disease. When we have the ripe fruit in the field and then we have wet weather conditions, whether it be morning dew or if we would have rainfall, then this black mold fruit rot becomes much more prevalent, and growers want to protect against it.
What is black mold and how does it affect the fruit?
Well, the name black mold, it has a black velvety spores on the fruit, and it makes it very unmarketable and unappealing to the consumer.
How does it develop?
Well, it's airborne, and it's everywhere. It's just that when the weather conditions are favorable, then the fruit will become infected. If the weather is very dry, then we don't have problems with this particular fruit rot. So growers are really are sort of praying for dry weather conditions during the harvest season.
Is there a way to deal with this, or is it something that you have to live with as far as harvest and production is concerned?
Well, growers have a chemical tool, fungicides, that are available. But what we're trying to do at the university is make this fit more into an integrated pest management system. And we're trying to determine a system where we can predict development of the disease based on weather events. And so it could be a forewarning for growers to begin either applying their pesticides or to withhold that application and save their money because the weather events aren't favorable for the disease, even though they may have ripe fruit in the field. So we're trying to be much more accurate in pinpointing when these chemicals would be needed, if at all.
How close are you to developing a workable system?
Well, we're hopeful that in the next couple of years we'll have a system that growers can use. Right now we're in a validation testing phase, but we have a model in place, and we're testing to see how fit this model is.
Let's move on now to the subject of late blight. Again, we're looking at a disease problem similar to black mold in that it all ties in with humidity, wetness, things like that.
Yes, the late blight is, again, a weather-driven disease. In this case, late blight can attack not only the fruit and causing the fruit to rot, but also the foliage and the rest of the plant. The late blight was one of the diseases that caused the great Irish potato famine and caused many of the Irish families to migrate to the U.S. in the 1800s. In California, when we had the El Nino weather year in 1998, we saw late blight, and it was fairly prevalent in our Central Valley. So it caused a lot of problems, caused extensive crop loss. Some growers had to disc fields, abandon fields. It was that severe.
What's the situation this year?
Well, this year, fortunately, we don't have that kind of El Nino driven weather. The weather is much drier, but we're also faced with these microclimate situations where, though it may be dry for other people, it may seem like we have a sunny, dry day and without any clouds, but for the tomato grower, in the vine itself, it may be fairly wet because of the amount of irrigation that they have to apply, and so the weather conditions in the plant canopy and the conditions that the fruit are exposed to can be very different.
In terms of future research, where are you going in looking at processing tomatoes?
Future research from the University of California. I think that we're very clearly focused on increasing our commitment to integrated pest management. We're hopeful that some of the plant resistance angle will be helpful so that we can reduce some of our dependence on some of the chemicals. I believe that some of the developments in biotechnology, that there will be increased consumer acceptance of these genetically engineered foods, and I believe that there's going to be some great help from the biotech people in reducing some of our problems with diseases. It might increase irrigation efficiency. There's a lot of potential there, and we want to be here to help evaluate those materials, and I think it's going to be exciting next 10 years or so.
Gene, thank you for your time. We'll let you get back to your growers.
Thank you very much, Robert.
We're talking this morning with Eileen Cullen, who is an entomology laboratory assistant at the University of California here at Davis, working in the Integrated Pest Management Laboratory. Tell us about what you've learned in terms of your laboratory work and how it applies to what we see here in the field.
Well, there's a lot of factors in integrated pest management for stink bug control. Some of it we've learned in the fields with commercial growers and some in the lab. The things we've learned in the commercial fields, we've done some research looking at canopy penetration of insecticides in the canopy. And we look at the processing tomato crop. It's a plant that has a very close, dense canopy. We have a lot of insect pests. Stink bug is one that is positioned in the inner canopy and even on the soil level. So that means with this dense canopy, when you're trying to control the stink bug with different insecticides, it's hard to reach the target pest and actually cover the pest with the insecticide. So some of the things we've done, we've looked at different sprayer factors with water volumes. We've tried to increase water volume. We've changed nozzle types and sprayer pressure to really try and cover the pest in the crop. And one hope with that is that some of the reduced risk insecticide materials, a lot of them depend on contact activity. They really need to cover the pest. And if we can use a little bit higher water volume to cover that pest, we could have better efficacy. We've done research in the lab looking at how, for instance, the stink bug develops. It's called a phenology model, where it's temperature dependent, and you can know how many heat units it takes for the stink bug to go from an egg to an adult. We did that in the lab, and we're trying to bring that model to the field so that growers and pest control advisors can make predictions about when the pest will be present in the field.
Now you have a tomato there in hand.
Yeah.
Tell us how the bug actually infects a tomato.
Oh, well, there's the first most obvious way is the feeding damage, and the stink bug is it's an insect that has a piercing and sucking mouth part, so it's kind of like a little straw. it will insert its mouth part into the fruit, and as it's feeding, taking substance out of the fruit, it's also injecting something into the fruit, a toxin that liquefies the fruit tissue, and that helps the stink bug digest what it's eating. But when it does that, it leaves behind feeding scars, and they're a white to yellow corky mass below the fruit tissue. If you were to peel back the very thin tomato peel, you'd see this unripened fruit tissue. So that's a main damage. It's a problem for whole peel canning. You wouldn't want to see this in a whole peel. Processors are very wary of that with good reason. The other problem is that the stink bug can get a yeast pathogen on its mouth part, and as it feeds from an infected fruit to an uninfected fruit, it could actually spread a pathogen, and then that can lead to secondary pathogens like mold, where the fruit could actually break down in the field. So those are the two main problems with stink bug damage.
So where are you going as far as future research in this area?
Well, at this point, our main focus over this growing season and the next is to learn more about the seasonal biology of the conspersed stink bug, which is the main one in the Sacramento and Delta areas here in California processing tomatoes. And we're actually collecting bugs throughout the whole year and dissecting them to learn about their migration phases. We're looking at their flight muscles to collect data, and their reproductive phases. Because if we can understand more about when they're laying eggs, when the generations are overlapping in the field, how they're migrating in, we would hope to apply that phenology model and that predictive decision making in a more efficient manner to really give a clear-cut IPM protocol for sampling.
Here at UC Davis, scientists have developed a genetically modified tomato plant, which thrives on salty water. They introduced this new variety at a recent news conference.
These two plants were grown in 40% seawater. The only difference between these two plants is one gene. We put in this plant a gene that codes for a protein that allows the plant to use salt water to grow. The leaves, although full of salt, are dampening the sodium into a vacuole, an organelle of the plant. The plant can use now the water to grow, and the fruits, this is too young yet, but the fruits are going to come in this plant are going to be very low in sodium. And the reason is that the plant is sort of filtering all the sodium as it comes, and when it reaches the fruit, the content of that fruit is going to be very low in sodium.
How many acres are we losing a year to salty water?
I cannot tell you about California really because I'm new. Nonetheless, I know, for example, that Pakistan, just to give an example, is losing 100 acres a day because the soil is so salty now that the more you irrigate, the worse you are making the problem. I know that vast lands in Latin America, Australia, California, San Joaquin Valley, Canada, southern Alberta, for example, are today just closing the farms because it's it. Remember, when you are a farmer, you are building up 10, 15% of your yield will be your profit. If you are losing 50, 60, 70% of your yield, you cannot work. You have to sell your farm.
UC researchers are hard at work developing other varieties of plants that are tolerant of salty water in an effort to deal with the worldwide problem of increased salinity of farmland soils. We hope you have enjoyed this look at agricultural research at the University of California. We'll keep you informed of ongoing developments on this and other topics in future programs. Thanks for watching.